Hello and welcome to Talk Nerdy to Me. Today, we're diving into a challenge every cloud professional encounters: navigating Azure's extensive catalog of services. With thousands of options available, the line between similar-sounding services can blur, making it difficult to know which one to choose. Think of Azure as a giant toolbox, each service as a specialized tool. Choosing the wrong one can feel like trying to hammer a nail with a screwdriver. In this episode, we'll compare 20 commonly confused Azure services, breaking them down with tech analogies, real-world use cases, and clear guidance to make your cloud journey smoother. Let's get started. The first 10 clearing up common confusions. Azure's ecosystem is vast, and with so many services, it's easy to mix them up. Let's clear the fog and bring some clarity with our first 10 commonly confused Azure services. Here's your cheat sheet to understanding these tools, complete with tech analogies to make them stick. Think of it as a flashlight to illuminate your path through Azure's labyrinth of options. 1. Azure Event Hub versus Event Grid. Analogy. Event Hub is like a high-speed conveyor belt in a factory, designed to handle bulk telemetry data at scale. Event Grid, on the other hand, is the postal service, efficiently sorting and delivering individual messages to the right recipients. Event Hub designed for streaming millions of events per second, ideal for telemetry and log data ingestion. Event Grid routes and manages individual events with filtering and formatting. Pro tip: use Event Grid for event-driven architectures and Event Hub for high-throughput telemetry streams. 2. Azure Blob Storage versus Azure File Storage. Analogy: Blob Storage is a giant warehouse for unstructured items, while file storage is like a shared office cabinet, structured and easily accessible. Blob Storage optimized for unstructured data, with cost-efficient tiering options. File Storage cloud-based NAS solution for SMB NFS protocols, ideal for legacy applications. Pro tip: choose Blob Storage for large-scale unstructured data, and File Storage for applications needing file shares. 3. Azure Static Web Apps versus Blob Static Websites. Analogy: hosting a static website on Blob is like setting up a DIY camping tent, while Azure Static Web Apps is a fully furnished smart home with modern features. Blob Static Websites. Basic static hosting with limited functionality. Azure Static Web Apps. Full support for modern static apps with CI/CD, authentication, and custom domains. Pro tip: use static web apps for production-ready hosting. Blob Static Websites work for quick and dirty projects. 4. Azure Private Link versus Service Endpoint. Analogy: Private Link is a secure underground tunnel, while Service Endpoint is a private toll road. Both keep you off the public highway. Private Link assigns private IPs to PAS services for seamless internal communication. Service Endpoint routes traffic securely over Azure's backbone but uses public PaaS endpoints. Pro tip: Private Link offers more isolation and security. Service Endpoint is cost-effective for simpler needs. 5. Service Principal versus Managed Identity. Analogy: service principals are like temporary guest accounts, while managed identities are permanent VIP passes with auto-renewing credentials. Service Principal customizable but requires manual credential management. Managed Identity simplifies security by eliminating hard-coded secrets. Pro tip: use managed identities for Azure native solutions. Choose Service Principals for multi-cloud scenarios. 6. Azure Synapse Analytics versus Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Analogy: Synapse is the Swiss Army knife of analytics, while SQL Data Warehouse is a precision scalpel for SQL-heavy workloads. Synapse combines big data processing and traditional warehousing. SQL Data Warehouse, focused on high-performance SQL-based analytics. Pro tip: choose Synapse for mixed workloads. SQL Data Warehouse is ideal for pure SQL analytics. 7. Azure App Service versus Azure Functions. Analogy: App Service is like a permanent residence, while functions are Airbnb rentals for short-term needs. App Service, scalable web app hosting. Azure Functions, event-driven, serverless compute for on-demand execution. Pro tip: use App Service for persistent applications and Functions for task-specific, event-driven logic. 8. Azure Machine Learning versus Cognitive Services. Analogy: machine learning is building your own robot, while cognitive services are plug-and-play robots ready to use. Machine learning, custom models, and advanced AI pipelines. Cognitive services, pre-built APIs for vision, language, and decision-making. Pro tip: use cognitive services for quick solutions and machine learning for custom, complex AI. 9. Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, versus Azure Container Instances, ACI. Analogy: AKS is a fully equipped restaurant kitchen for orchestrating multi-course meals, while ACI is a food truck, quick, agile, and perfect for one dish at a time. AKS handles orchestrated, multi-container workloads. ACI simplified serverless container hosting for individual tasks. Pro tip: use AKS for production-scale apps and ACI for lightweight, quick deployments. 10. Azure DevOps versus GitHub Actions. Analogy: Azure DevOps is a full project management suite, while GitHub Actions is a lightweight, workflow-centric assistant. Azure DevOps: comprehensive CI/CD, project management, and repo management. GitHub Actions: CI/CD workflows directly integrated with GitHub repositories. Pro tip: use Azure DevOps for enterprise-scale projects and GitHub Actions for GitHub-focused workflows. The next 10 advanced comparisons. 11. Azure Logic Apps versus Power Automate. Analogy: Logic Apps are industrial-grade automation tools, while Power Automate is a user-friendly DIY kit. 12. Azure Monitor versus Application Insights. Analogy: Azure Monitor is the entire surveillance system. Application Insights is the security camera focused on your app. 13. Azure Data Factory versus Synapse Pipelines. Analogy: Data Factory is the freight train moving raw materials, while Synapse Pipelines process them into finished products. 14. Azure Firewall versus Network Security Groups, NSG. Analogy: Azure Firewall is a fortified castle gate. NSGs are guards stationed at every door. 15. Azure Front Door versus Azure Traffic Manager. Analogy: Front Door is a content concierge, while Traffic Manager is a GPS for routing requests. 16. Azure Disk Storage versus Managed Disks. Analogy: Disk storage is like buying a blank hard drive. Managed disks are pre-configured and managed by Azure. 17. Azure Data Lake versus Blob Storage. Analogy: Data Lake is a data swamp ready for analytics, while Blob is a clear pool for general storage. 18. Azure SQL Database versus Cosmos DB. Analogy: SQL Database is a traditional library. Cosmos DB is a global, multilingual archive. 19. Azure Functions versus Logic Apps. Analogy: Functions are precise tools for specific tasks, while Logic Apps are an entire workshop for automation. 20. Azure Key Vault versus Azure Managed HSM. Analogy: Key Vault is a secure vault, while Managed HSM is a high-security deposit box for sensitive keys. Simplifying Azure's overlap. A quick comparison guide. Navigating Azure's extensive service catalog can sometimes feel like walking through a maze. So many options, each with subtle differences. To help you pick the right tools for the job, we've created a clear and concise comparison table. This table breaks down 20 commonly confused Azure services across categories like storage, networking, analytics, and more. For each pair, we explain when to choose one over the other based on your use case. Think of it as your Azure decision cheat sheet. Take a look at the guide below and save time and resources by selecting the best service for your next project. Category: Messaging and Streaming Service. Comparison: Azure Event Hub versus Event Grid. Choose this if Event Hub: high throughput streaming for telemetry logs. Event Grid: event routing and delivery. Category: Storage Solutions Service Comparison. Azure Blob Storage versus Azure File Storage. Choose this if Blob Storage: large unstructured data with tiered costs. File Storage: shared access via SMB NFS. Category: Static Web Hosting Service Comparison. Blob Static Website versus Static Web Apps. Choose this if Blob Static Website: basic static content hosting. Static Web Apps: full-featured apps with CI/CD. Category: Networking Service Comparison. Private Link versus Service Endpoint. Choose this if Private Link: private IP for PaaS services. Service Endpoint: secure internal routing for PaaS. Category: Identity and Access Service. Comparison: Service Principal versus Managed Identity. Choose this if Service Principal: cross-platform access. Managed Identity: simplified. Secure Azure Resource Access. Category: Analytics Service Comparison. Synapse Analytics versus SQL Data Warehouse. Choose this if Synapse: hybrid big data plus SQL Analytics. SQL Data Warehouse: focused warehousing. Category: Application Hosting Service. Comparison: App Service versus Functions. Choose this if App Service: long-running web apps. Functions: event-driven, short-lived tasks. Category: Machine Learning Service Comparison. Azure Machine Learning versus Cognitive Services. Choose this if Machine Learning Advanced Custom AI Projects. Cognitive Services: ready-to-use AI APIs. Category: Containers Service Comparison. AKS versus Container Instances. Choose this if AKS full orchestration for containers. ACI serverless deployment for simple needs. Category data integration service comparison data factory versus logic apps. Choose this if data factory, ETL for big data pipelines. Logic apps, workflow automation with triggers. Category monitoring service comparison, monitor versus application insights. Choose this if monitor, holistic Azure resource view. Insights, app-specific performance. Category, load balancing service, comparison, load balancer versus traffic manager. Choose this if load balancer, Azure region traffic balancing. Traffic manager, multi-region management. Category security service comparison, Azure Defender versus Sentinel. Choose this if Defender, individual resource protection. Sentinel security event monitoring. Category DevOps service comparison, Azure Pipelines versus GitHub Actions. Choose this if Pipelines enterprise workflows. GitHub Actions lightweight CI/CD. Category integration service comparison, Service Bus versus Event Grid. Choose this if Service Bus. Reliable queuing, Event Grid lightweight event distribution. Category database service comparison, SQL database versus Cosmos DB. Choose this if SQL database, structured relational data. Cosmos DB, NoSQL, globally distributed. Category cache service comparison, Azure Cache for Redis versus in-memory tables. Choose this if Redis high-speed caching, in-memory tables, small workloads caching. Category web gateway service comparison, API management versus application gateway. Choose this if API management, secure API management. Gateway load balancing for web apps. Category backup solution service comparison, recovery services Vault versus Backup Center. Choose this if Vault centralized backup storage. Backup Center multi-service management. Final thoughts. Navigating Azure's vast array of services can sometimes feel like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle. But with the right analogies and clear distinctions, it becomes much more manageable. Remember, the key to Azure mastery lies in understanding the subtle nuances between services, so you can confidently pick the perfect tool for the job.